Hello, in today's video we are going to discuss the relationship between frequency and surrender, between light and emptiness, working with phenomenal energies at many degrees and subtleties of the vibrational scale, and the relation to emptiness, the relation to our personal emptiness, our personal Akashic consciousness, and much more. So, when we are working with energy, why is it so useful to work with energy as an object of meditation directly? Well, the energy permeates and moves through the different layers of the body, the emotions, the mind. So if we focus on the solidity of the body, say we meditate on the body, then we will bring energy to the body and we will start to entrench our identity into the body. If we focus on the emotions as an object of meditation, this is very common in more of some of the new age type stuff where you focus a lot on the emotions. And this is quite common in the people who are cultivating communities around different systems, etc., is you might meditate on an emotion or sit with your emotions. Is the value to this? Yes. We need to find comfort and the ability to sustain ourselves and exist within the tumultuous nature of the emotions. Good, bad, whatever. So what's the value in sitting with your emotions? Well, you stop being scared of your emotions. You stop being scared of your feelings. And this allows you to navigate that landscape and potentially roller coaster with more equanimity. Now, if we focus on the emotions, we lodge the energy into the emotions, right? So the emotions grow and our identity will start to become trapped within the landscape of the emotions. So that's something we need to be aware of if we're going to do a lot of meditations focused on the emotions. Now, instead of looking at the emotional container of what that energy means, right? The habitual container of that emotional energy, through sitting with the emotion, one of the biggest purposes of that is to realize that we are creating that container, creating and imposing meaning on that emotional energy. So once again, through working on the energy or meditating on the energy, instead of the habitual container of the emotion, that energy is allowed to move, right? And the same applies to the mind. If we focus on our thoughts, this is common in beginner meditation where the instruction might be, okay, focus on your thoughts, right? What is it that you're thinking? Let them come, let them go. Now, what most people will do is focus on their current understanding of what thoughts are, which is the formed thought. And if we lodge our energy into formed thoughts, we will begin to identify with the formation of thoughts, with that plane of energy. Now, as we start to work on the arising of the thought forms and the cessation of the thought forms as they fall away, you'll start to ask the question, well, where do the thoughts come from, right? Where do the emotions come from? Where does sensation of the physical body come from? And through this questioning, you start to go closer and closer or further and further back towards more of a source type of meditative experience. So if we meditate on the energy, then the identity doesn't lodge in the thought forms. It's allowed to move. The thought forms are compilations of energy. They're consolidated, condensed forms of energy that represent in a particular thought form. So we want to do our best to avoid the identification with the thought forms. Okay, now, as we start to progress deeper and deeper, or step further and further back, or ascend, however you want to look at it, the emptiness starts to arise. So the energy that all this stuff is coming out of, we start to observe there are different densities to this energy. And as that energy density relationship starts to refine, then we start to touch closer and closer to the emptiness type of phenomenon. And this can be worked on through the Akasha. Now, as we start to work on this emptiness, we are struck by release, right? The mental, emotional, and physical response to touching emptiness can be an incredible type of release, or an incredible type of experience of everything in you that is in contrast to that emptiness, right? So, as with all things, as with all peak new connections, we either experience what aspects of us are in contrast to it, or what aspects are in resonance to it. If we're experiencing the parts of us that are in resonance with that emptiness, and more of us is allowed to fall away into that emptiness, it's an incredibly blissful and blissfully non-existent type of experience. If we identify with the parts of us that are in contrast to that, then it can be quite painful. And this applies to working with frequency of form, as well as that underlying emptiness. So, if we are working from the paradigm of release, what ways can we stress that release? Can we apply pressure to it, right? Can we encourage the evolution, that process of increasing the potency, the realms in which that release can function? And in this case, that release is not just release, okay? It is connection to, a relationship with, and we use relationship, but this is beyond relating. It's beyond a relationship, because that is two things, right? It is also not one thing, and it's certainly, I mean, you could say zero things, but something between 1 and 0, something like that. Sorry for bumping the mic there. I got a bunch of no-see-ums that the fan sucked into the van last night, so I got a bunch of bites all over me. Those little tiny bugs that get through screens. So you have this non-relationship relationship you're building with emptiness. Okay, now how do we stress that? Well, you can work on alchemizing or on strengthening this relationship through bringing it into lower density activities. And this would be like normal communication, normal daily life, that kind of stuff. You can also work on alchemizing the high end, which would be through meditative retreat, time in meditative retreat in nature, where the environment is more perfect, we might say. And this allows us to more easily sustain the high end of this frequency scale, which we'll touch into in a minute, as opposed to always working on the lower end. You can become very, very good at release on the lower end, and like very good at alchemizing that and existing in something closer to normal life, with a high degree of spiritual connection. But it will be within a certain paradigm. Then you need to, of course, break free from that so that you can touch into these higher realms. Once you've touched into them, these more refined states, then you can stabilize them. Once they're stabilized, then you bring them back into the lower aspects of density. Okay, now release and frequency and strengthening or working with resistance. So that's one way, is to work in lower density modes and operative aspects of life while sustaining as strong a relationship to emptiness or to super refined frequency as possible. Of course, there are other ways to increase complexity, such as working with physical expenditure and exercise and rucking through the woods, all kinds of different ways to do this. Now, another way, and this is the one we're talking about here, is working with higher and higher and more potent energy of the vibrational scale. So working with stronger and stronger and stronger, more refined, energetic light, etc. Essentially, right? And as you do this, as you start working with more dynamic and powerful spheres and meditations on spheres of energy and constellations, this will pressurize you, add complexity in different ways. And this can be incredibly difficult to, in the beginning, sustain a relationship with emptiness, with release, with surrender, in the presence of these high-octane energies. So as you work on these, they will stimulate everything in you, as we said earlier, that is in contrast to those energies, right? That is in contrast to that. That is in contrast to, or we could say, in stagnancy in relationship to the infinity divinity paradigm and scale. So, what's that mean? Well, that means that you are adding resistance to your ability to touch into that infinity, through infinity, have a relationship to that underlying and all pervasive, all penetrating and all permeating emptiness, right? And so the more potent those frequencies that you're working with in meditation, the more they will stimulate and show you those parts of yourself that are contracted, that are condensed and stuck in that non-moving aspect of yourself, right? This gets into the incredible arrogance of the doing mind, the mind that part of ourselves that thinks we can do all this stuff. I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do this little micro movement, I'll do this little quick trick of like mind, bouncing around fluctuation to make myself relax, or to make this easier, or to, feel the energy, all this stuff, right? That is, as you go through this process, you'll start to recognize that there is an incredible arrogance in the doing, the trying nature of the mind, this part of ourselves that thinks that it is better, that it's smarter, that it can hack its way through. And so the energy will inflate the means, or this light will inflate the identity that attaches to this doing aspect of mind. Now, when that high octane energy, that high octane light comes through, it will pressurize the body and the tissue. You start to fill, and this is that same feeling of the identity elated in itself, right? The identity touches in with this light, it elates, it inflates, and then we look at this as the experience of that light, of that energy. And we attach to it, and we stick to it, and we go, okay, this stretch and inflation of the body, this incredible elation, this is what this light is. This is that energy of light. But another way to look at it is that elation and that fullness of your relationship with light is in fact your resistance to that higher octane energy. It is not, you are not a conduit, a pure, like, connected vehicle of emptiness. You are actually being pressurized by that light. So what's it pressurizing, right? Perception is reflection, and through reflection comes projection. So then what we start to do is we start to project our own resistance to that light, to that refinement, that energy. We start to project that out. And through that projection, we further stabilize our own identity and our own sense of self, on and on and on. The ego runs rampant with that. And as in all things, the ego is incredibly intelligent, and it will insert itself into the very activities that we do to potentially find a greater space and liberation from attachment to that ego. Of course, the identity has purpose. We cannot exist. We tend to die without that. There is consolidation that occurs and an identity that energy needs to inflate so that we can be a thing. So, that energy runs through. It elates us. We become inflated and full with that light. Maybe we start to radiate that through a field. The mind, that energy blows the mental space, that mind space open. And, okay, you're this big field of light. It's full, it's whatever it is. And there's incredible potencies that can arise, power that can arise within this. And what we need to do then is recognize that that is a pressurization, a point of resistance, something that is helping us to find on the other side of it a deeper relationship to, with, and as emptiness, right? And once we find that, then this light, all that elated identity, all that inflated crazy stuff that we're experiencing, it all in an instant can disappear. And this is where it's tricky, because you go, okay, well, how do I know I'm progressing if I'm not experiencing this stuff? But then you start to get an inkling, a feeling for the non-experience of phenomena, the non-experience of this incredible energy. And as this starts to happen, your field becomes more and more conductive. That energy can flow and it can move, right? And so this emptiness, this perception, right? This perception is no longer the result of reflection, right? Reflection is something bouncing off another thing. It's no longer a perception that exists because it's not bouncing off the identity. It's not reflecting off the identity. Because it's not reflecting off the identity, it then doesn't have this projecting quality. And you experience this weird thing of not experiencing a thing, right? And this is all that weirdness that you get to in higher level meditation. Now, we need to be very cognizant of this projecting of our resistance, right? Projecting our resistance of these higher octane energies as the thing itself, right? Because then what we end up sharing or expressing is not the clear energy, it's just our resistance. And so you get some really weird stuff that starts to happen. So this is where the surrender thing becomes very important, because you'll start to realize that a lot of this identity, elation, that inflation, we tend to do that, right? It becomes one of those doing things, right? There's that, I guess we could call this Yoda 2.0. He has that great little saying of don't try, do or do not. But trying, and doing, these are things. So if you'll start to recognize that the mind that's doing, the doing mind, is actually a contractive, a folding. It's a folding mind. And it folds against itself so it can register and recognize itself, right? And that doing folds. This happens subtly in the tissue in relation to the mind and the mental energy, of course, the mental forms, those foldings, the astral energy, and the emotions, all this stuff. There's physically there's a subtle folding that occurs. So when something has something else to pressurize, it then knows it's a thing, right? Perception, reflection, right? It's bouncing off something. Now it knows where it is. It has a point of reference. So this reference is what we need to look at. And we really like to reference ourselves. And if you want to have a laugh, you can think about self-referencing and how you reference yourself, and how you're self-referencing your contemplation of how you maybe don't want to self-reference anymore. And it's a pretty hilarious little little pastime. But that's this folding. So this folding occurs, and this inflates the identity. It gives us perception of one thing and another thing. That's how we know where we are. That's how we perceive strength, how we perceive the power of that energy that might be moving through physically. If you do internal, martial arts and Qi Gong and stuff, what you'll find is that there will be these habits that develop of pressurizing, of folding to increase the pressure so you can feel the strength of that energy. But what you're actually perceiving is, and creating in those scenarios, is creating resistance to that energy so you can feel your own reference and power through the contrast to that energy. This is very important because this is a very common phenomena that we run into, and the result can be a lot of real weird ways that we force contrast upon ourselves so that we can experience ourselves. So this is something to note, to acknowledge the existence of, and then to, in a very soft way, we note when that might be happening. All those foldings, remember, are doings. And this doing, as I said, comes from this very deep type of arrogance. This part of us that thinks that it can sort of hack its way through this. That we can do this thing, I'm gonna do this thing, make this energy strong. How do we perceive our strength? Through resistance. Okay, so as that arrogance starts to fade away, as that folding nature of the doingness starts to fade away, there is this relationship with emptiness, this relationship with that which is infinite. And this brings us into a different type of understanding when it comes to universal light and the light of all these different spheres we might meditate on as well. These amalgamations of different universal principle and the alphabet of creation. We settle into a new relationship or a new non-experience of this stuff, and that light becomes clear. It changes from this crazy, strong, bright, white light, or insert different colors, etc., and it becomes clear light. And this is often talked about as the closer to the pure reality of that light. It's clear because there's nothing in resistance, right? The obvious nature, that radiance of non-clear light, it's radiating your own identity's interference to that pure flow. That's often where that radiance comes from. And there can be incredibly positive qualities in that identity radiance if the identity has been developed in such a way that it is a very positive mind, it's a very positive and goodwill, good intentioned astral body, a very positive, good intentioned physical body. You can radiate, that identity can radiate very positive qualities. So it's not to denigrate that, but we have to keep moving forward and keep progressing, keep releasing, right? And as we release, we'll start to come into a understanding of clear light. This is talked about in Tibetan type work quite a bit. All those systems of tantric non-dual yoga, on and on, these clear light states. And this is the almost a non-experience. So of course we can't really talk about it. But it's good to know that it's there, because the thing that holds us back all the time is ourselves. And remember, the ego, the identity, will insert itself in very, very genius ways into all this stuff. So we want to start to find ways to recognize how this interference, this sort of insidious placing of itself that the identity does, how that might reflect, right? And we'll use that again, that reflection. How do we know? So what are common traits that we might experience, common experiences we experience when that ego is inserting itself? Well, one of those experiences is experience. As we experience, we then recognize that experience. And anytime you get this sort of, it's very often in the chest for a lot of people, this inflated elation, that excitement, that's a very good indication that there's identity that's stuck there. Now, not to say that you shouldn't have positive joy on the path. Of course, it is a blissful and joyous experience. But we want to be wary of attaching to all of this. The conductive nature of things is a conduit. And a conduit doesn't have to mean an enclosed thing that stuff moves through, right? We need to, as always, let go of preconceptions of what words have to mean when it comes to this stuff. Because when we first hear these words, it's always earlier in our development. So we hear them from the perspective of our dual nature, of our sort of three-dimensional identity and ego and all that stuff. And if we hold on to the meaning that we gave these words then, it'll make it very difficult to progress, because we'll have created these boxes for ourselves. So, energy, frequency, why work on that? Because it gives us an incredible amount of experience in terms of what aspects of us are in contrast to that. What parts of us are still holding out against full surrender into that emptiness and into that infinity. And that's of incredible value. Release, surrender, build your relationship with energy, right? Build the refinement of that vibrational scale, that understanding of how that energy refines, okay? And how your own relationship, again, we'll use that word, with surrender, with infinity, with emptiness, through this whole Akashic paradox, how that is able to contend with that connection with this new, refined, high-octane light and energy you might be working with. Okay, I think that's everything for this video. I hope you enjoyed this, found it helpful. Coming up, there is a retreat, November 2025. This is a 30-day spiritual attunement meditation retreat. Currently, it is online. It will be 5 hours a day, and we'll be going through a level 1 initiation for the first week. The second portion will be about 9 days, and that is working through some spheric meditations, introducing some evocational deity yoga, and working with, apologies, I am on the side of a not too busy road here, working with some again, evocation, different spheres, connecting in some aspects of the solar system. And the last 2 weeks will be, of course, a deep dive into everything that we do in the level 1 and 2, really refining that, because it's a lot. it's a lot of stuff to go through. And we'll be bringing in an introduction to other spheres of the solar system with the meditations on Venus, on Mercury, and on Mars. This is sort of harmonizing the humanity, the human side of things into the spiritual side of things that we work through in level 2 with the solar and lunar meditations, and of course the universal light and deep akasha that we do. Of course, refining all that as well. So if you're interested, link should be in the description or on the website. Of course, there is other stuff that I can't think of right now, so check the website, and there's courses there, all that kind of stuff. All right, thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.